But I want to make it clear that this has never been dealt with compassionately by Senator McConnell. He has always held out until the very last minute, and only then, under intense lobbying and public shaming, has he even deigned to move on it. This is not a Republican-Democrat issue. There are Republicans on the bill. We'd obviously like to have more of them. But Senator McConnell has seen fit to, in 2010, he used it to make sure that the Bush tax cuts would be permanent. In 2015, he took it out of the transportation bill because he wanted to extract some promises on oil imports. And so in this bill right now, in 2019, he's been aware of this. We were told in August that this fund was running out of money and that people were going to have their awards slashed by 30, 50, up to 70%.
Of critics, and mostly Republican senators, say, one, that the fund should not be open-ended, and two, they say, look, this should be handled by the states, not by the federal government. Briefly, your response to that.
Okay, it should be open-ended because cancer doesn't have an expiration date on it, and the gestation period of different illnesses goes along different words. The idea that this is a state issue, 9/11 was, you know, it would be like after Pearl Harbor, saying, you know what, we're not going to do anything for people in Pearl Harbor because that's a Hawaii issue. This was an attack on America. As I said in the meeting, they didn't shout death to Tribeca. And to try and push this off as a New York issue, and I think they do that because they believe New York is reliably liberal and democratic, and it's not as important to them. Not all Republicans oppose this, but everyone who has opposed it is a Republican, and it's unacceptable. And they've done it now for years. Senator McConnell, Lindsey Graham is the one who's the head of Judiciary. He's the one who's going to be negotiating, whether it's 5, 10 years. We cannot make these individuals continue to live in the agonizing uncertainty of not knowing that these programs will be extended and that they will be able to move on with their lives.
This is former host of The Daily Show, Jon Stewart, tearing into Mitch McConnell for his disingenuous response as the Victim Compensation Fund, or VCF, for 9/11 first responders is set to run out. Because despite the fact that 9/11 first responders quite literally rely on this fund to afford their medical care for illnesses contracted as they recovered bodies from the rubble, McConnell has continuously used it as a bargaining chip to tick off agenda items for his party. Of course, when Republicans are called out on their continued reluctance to back the legislation, they'll shield themselves with their typical refrain of, but how are we going to pay for it? Because when it's something they want, like, oh, I don't know, a $1.5 trillion tax cut for their rich pals who will then turn around and donate to their re-election campaigns, they find a way to get it through. But when it's for something to help regular people, like making sure first responders in a blue state who have now sat for 70 rounds of chemotherapy to keep their cancer at bay can afford to survive, well, suddenly they're fiscally conservative again. And to be clear, this has been a recurring theme. During the last round of negotiations, Republicans were reportedly reluctant to sign on to the legislation because they were worried about finding a way to pay for it. And yet, they did miraculously manage to restore $3 billion for crop insurance in the same transportation bill. I wonder what the difference is between those who would benefit from crop insurance versus primarily those New York City first responders and New York City firefighters and New York City police officers who would benefit from the VCF. And this is all part of their gaslighting campaign, wherein Republicans have tried to co-opt the entire notion of patriotism in this country. They'll parade their buzzwords like liberty and freedom, preaching about how important it is to stand for the Pledge of Allegiance, but when it comes time to walk the walk, beyond some shallow display like singing along to the national anthem, well then that patriotism suddenly seems to hit some roadblocks. Because instead of unequivocally supporting those first responders who gave their health in an absolute instant to save other Americans, instead of immediately extending this legislation until 2090, because guess what? Cancer doesn't typically get easier to deal with age. Instead of sparing them the indignity of having to crawl back to politicians every 5 years to beg effectively not to let them die, that's exactly what they're being made to do. I mean, maybe we should call 9/11 first responders fetuses so that the GOP might actually pretend to care. Because as a caucus, the Republican Party has shown more willingness to rally behind a fertilized egg than humans who were prepared to make the ultimate sacrifice for this country when we needed it most. So while this hard-fought battle will hopefully and likely result in this legislation getting approved, the fact that there needed to be one in the first place tells you everything you need to know about the political party that view themselves as patriots.